Here we go. Corral going deep. Sideline caught, touchdown! Deon Cain. What field goal?
There's the talent I've been talking about. That was a beautiful throw from Matt Corral.
In the words of Birmingham legend, Jameis Winston, that's a W. Let's eat. We are here to recap week 1 of the UFL, including the Birmingham Stallions knocking off the XFL champs, the Arlington Renegades, in a game in which they decisively won and proved that they are the team to beat in spring football, which came, of course, as no surprise to us. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about next week's matchup against the Michigan Panthers in a game of undefeated teams, both 1-0 in the USFL conference, with huge implications early on in the season here. And we're going to go over all the latest news related to the Stallions and the entire UFL. So thanks for tuning in and enjoy.
Here we go. Hey, giddy up on 3. 1, 2, 3. Giddy up.
You can feel the buzz when you're around this city. People have fallen in love with the Birmingham Stallions.
Here we go. We're getting a little juice going.
USFL championship.
All right, so hopefully you had the chance to watch last week's game either in person or live on TV, or at least go back and watch it after the fact. Want to give a quick little kind of recap of what happened and add some comments along the way before giving my sort of 3 takeaways at the end and 3 stars of the game. The game started with Arlington getting the ball first, and one of the things to talk more about, but started with a dumb penalty, personal foul, that after a good return by Arlington ended up giving them the ball in Stallions territory. So, that's one of the things that just can't continue to happen. With the way kickoffs are set up in the UFL, it's already set up to give the offense really good field position. So defenses already kind of have their back against the wall just from the jump. You throw on top of that a 15-yard penalty, and it just really makes it difficult on the defense. So fortunately, our defense, despite having their backs against the wall, was able to make a huge play when Carlos Davis, a new defensive tackle who's the twin brother actually of Khalil Davis, who plays now for the Houston Texans after a great season with us last year, after he was able to strip Luis Perez on a drop back, and Mark Gilbert was able to jump on the ball, who we'll talk more about. We were able to get the ball back in Arlington territory, which was a great way to sort of shift the momentum and start the game with a really strong defensive series for us. And unfortunately, on our first series, we actually had a turnover of our own, and that basically came down to really, I think, kind of a mistiming, miscommunication between Matt Corral and Deon Cain. We were moving the ball pretty well, but we ran a screen. Corral threw the ball maybe a little bit quick, a little bit behind Deon. It ended up going through his hands, and the defender was just kind of right time, right place, and was able to get the interception. And so, that was unfortunate just to start the game that way and to not come away with points on our first possession. And it's not something I would lose any sleep over. I think, again, it's something that's very correctable, and as these guys get kind of more in sync, it's not something I think that's going to carry over into future weeks. But, again, it was a bummer to have that happen on our first possession. And probably not great for Matt's kind of initial confidence starting his first game since 2021. And so Arlington got the ball back. We're able to drive a little bit, and we're able to come away with a field goal. We got the ball back and sort of did the same thing. Got a great kickoff return from Deon Cain, who looked amazing returning kicks. He was great for us doing that last year, had 2 kick return touchdowns last year, and sort of picked up right where he left off, had an awesome return out to about midfield. And so we were able to drive down and get into the red zone, but unfortunately weren't able to punch it in, only came away with a field goal, which led to Arlington in the beginning of the second quarter getting their first touchdown of the season and the first touchdown of the UFL. Luis Perez found Isaiah Winstead on about a 50-yard bomb in the back of the end zone, and that put Arlington up after the 2-point conversion 11-3. Again, this wasn't great, but I think you can kind of chalk it up to a blown coverage or miscommunication that hopefully will not continue into future weeks. I don't know exactly what happened. We had plenty of guys around Winstead, but for whatever reason, the 3 guys that were there, he was behind all of them. And so he was able to catch the ball easily and walk into the end zone. That didn't happen again the rest of the game, and I don't think it'll happen again the rest of the season, hopefully. So I know Corey Chamberlain, our secondaries coach, will get that fixed. And unfortunately, it happened, but hopefully we can learn from it and avoid it, prevent it from happening again. The Stallions at that point brought Martinez into the game at quarterback, Adrian Martinez, which I've seen some false things going around on the internet, and so I want to kind of dispel this rumor. But Matt Corral did not get benched. He was not, sidelined because of supposed poor play or something like that. The plan was always to bring Martinez on third drive. If you've ever followed a team that uses two quarterbacks, this is a very common thing, especially early in the year. Let the first quarterback, the starting quarterback, get the first two series, and then bring the backup in for the third or maybe fourth series, and then kind of feel it out from there. And that's exactly what Skip planned to do. He said from the beginning he was going to play both quarterbacks. He told Matt he'd get the first two series. He told Adrian he'd get the next two series, and that's exactly what happened. And so Matt did not get benched. Adrian came in as planned, and he looked really good, especially with his feet, as expected. He had 3 carries in the game for over 50 yards. He had a couple good throws too, but unfortunately when we got down closer to the red zone, he actually had a ball sail on him, go over Gary Jennings' hands, and get intercepted by Arlington. And so skipping ahead a little bit here, Arlington actually ended up on that next drive just punting. It was the first punt of the game. And we got the ball back, and Adrian had another good run, but actually got hurt and had to come out of the game and wasn't able to come back in. So pretty small sample size for him. He only ended up throwing the ball, I think, maybe, 6 times in the game, and he was 2 of 6 with that one interception. So not the best outing in terms of his arm. But in terms of what he can do with his legs, we really got a glimpse of that. Again, 3 carries for over 50 yards. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So that was exciting to see. But when he had to come out, Matt came back in the game, and that was when the tide really turned. With about 15 or so seconds left, the Stallions were getting close to field goal range, and Skip dialed up a beautiful play where Deion Kane on the outside did a double move, made it sort of maybe look like he was going to stop, come back, try and catch the ball and get out of bounds for a field goal, but turned upfield, went down the sideline. Corral saw him open, threw a beautiful, just perfect ball about 40 yards downfield, hit Kane in stride in the end zone, and boom, after the 2-point conversion by Ricky Person, Stallions tied up 11-11 with a couple seconds to go before half, and we got the ball to start the second half. So a massive play in terms of shifting the momentum of the game, tying it up before half, boosting Corral's confidence heading into half and into the second half, which he played the entire second half. And so, again, that was sort of the key moment, the key turning point of the game. And once that happened, you just kind of felt it that it was going to be different from there on out. And so we actually got the ball to start the second half, which unfortunately we couldn't do anything. We had to punt, but the defense settled in, forced a punt of their own. And then after that, we really kind of got rolling, and the Stallions were able to drive down the field. They were able to punch it in with a T-bone touchdown from Ricky Person Jr., which was awesome to see. Everybody loves the T formation, so it was great to see that make its first emergence, first touchdown of the year. And that put the Stallions up 19-11. Arlington was able to get a field goal after that. Again, unfortunately, just some stupid penalties and things like that happened throughout the game. The defense kind of started with their backs against the wall at a couple points, and that's something the Stallions are going to have to clean up. But they were at least able to hold Arlington to a field goal, make it 19-14, and then the Stallions were able to sort of drive down the field, punch it in again after that with a C.J. Marable touchdown, go up 27-14. And after a Mark Gilbert interception on the next drive, kind of down in Stallions territory at the 5, that sort of sealed the game. And so overall, a great performance, great win by the Stallions, way to kick off the season against the XFL champs and sort of show them who the real champs are. And 3 takeaways from the game. I want to kind of do this each week, just 3 of my personal takeaways. The first one that I had from this game was that it might be a new season, but it looks like the same team. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of new faces, a lot of new starters, a lot of new players, but in terms of how this team played, how the game sort of played itself out, it very much reminded me of last year. They got off to a slow start. If you go back and read my scouting report for what I thought the Stallions needed to do in this game against the Renegades, they didn't follow any of it. They got off to a slow start. They got behind early. They turned the ball over, had stupid penalties. Like, those were all the things I said they shouldn't do. But that's what happened. And like the Stallions team of last year, the turning point really came right before half. If you remember last year, the Stallions had so many games, I think it was 9 out of 12, where right before half they got the ball, 2-minute offense, really got cooking, they punched it in, and then the game wasn't the same after that. And that's pretty much exactly what happened with this team. They were down 11-3, got the ball with like a minute and 20 seconds to go before half, got a huge touchdown from Corral to Kane, and the game was not the same after that, which, again, very similar to the team last year. And even on the defensive side of the ball, I thought our defense overall played really well. They really only kind of gave up that one big touchdown. Otherwise, they gave up a couple field goals, but again, I think, part of that was just field position and them sort of starting with their backs against the wall. But, when push came to shove, they forced turnovers. Like I said, Gilbert had that interception down near our end zone. He also had that fumble recovery in Stallions territory. So the Stallions defense, again, was very similar to kind of last year, sort of the bend but don't break. Arlington moved the ball. We gave up maybe more first downs, and there was more open receivers and things like that than I would like. But despite the fact that they moved the ball, they didn't really come away with a lot of points. We had that one blown coverage, but other than that, the Stallions really kind of clamped down. They wouldn't let them sort of sniff the end zone otherwise. They had some huge plays, again, some huge takeaways, and that very much resembles the defense from last year. And so overall, I thought this team looked very similar to last year's team, despite, again, the changes, in terms of the way they play, the style in which they play, again, where they kind of have their strengths and their weaknesses. Again, it reminds me very much of the 2023 Stallions. The one thing I would say that, doesn't necessarily remind me of last year's team, again, especially down the stretch, is that this team was too sloppy. And, that's probably partially excusable just because it's the first week of the season. Again, lots of new players, like all those kinds of factors. But it's not acceptable. And, the standard is the standard, and this is not the expectation for the Stallions. And Skip talked about it in the press conference, like this is something they're going to get fixed. It's not okay. But there was too many stupid penalties, too many turnovers, too many dumb mistakes. Again, the blown coverage. We had a missed field goal, just like all those kinds of things. And so, that's something that's got to get corrected. They were able to overcome it in week 1, but you can't keep doing that and expect to be as dominant as the Stallions were last year. And so I feel confident that the coaches and the players will take care of that it'll get better. But it needs to happen sooner than later. And even just little things like, you could just tell the quarterbacks and the receivers were out of sync a lot. There was a lot of kind of, either overthrows or, quarterbacks, thought a receiver was going to be in one place, but he was in another, or, just the timing was off. There was miscommunication. And so offensively and defensively, you could just kind of tell there were some first game issues, miscommunications, poor timing, out of sync, all that kind of stuff. And that stuff just has to get cleaned up. And again, I think it will. And so, but that's something that with a great Michigan team in week 2, you can't sort of kick the can down the road on that stuff. It's got to happen now. And then the last takeaway I had was that the offense looked potent. After the game, the Stallions looked at the stats, and the Stallions had 409 offensive yards, which the next closest team in the UFL was Michigan with 280. So the Stallions, no other team had 300 yards. The Stallions broke 400, which just goes to show you how potent this offense is. And especially once you saw Corral kind of settle in, in the second half, and the offensive line settle in too, and the running game get going, it was really game over at that point. The Stallions ran for 183 yards, which, again, the next closest team was Michigan with, I think, 112. So 70 more rushing yards than the next closest team, especially in week 1. I mean, that was huge. The Stallions last year really struggled to run the ball early on in the season. The only running game they had for the first several weeks was Alex Magoo taking off and just making stuff happen with his feet. This week, it wasn't like that. Martinez obviously did a lot of things, which was big. But even if you take Martinez's contribution out of the picture, we had 130 rushing yards, over 130 rushing yards, which is, more than any other team. And so that was really great to see, to have that in week 1, to dominate the line of scrimmage, to be able to move the ball on the ground like that early on in the season, and then to be able to see, obviously, the flashes of what Corral can do with his arm, with his legs, with what Martinez can do with his legs, all the weapons that we have at receiver with Deion Kane, Benjamin Victor, Marlon Williams, Amari Rogers, who had an incredible 2-point conversion catch. I mean, this offense looks scary, which is awesome to say for us, scary for the rest of the league. So those are my kind of three key takeaways from the game. And I want to kind of do this each week, talk about 3 stars of the game, just sort of 3 players of the game that I think deserve being mentioned. And the way I'm going to do it is I have a 1-star player, a 2-star player, and a 3-star player. 3 stars sort of being, the peak performer of the week. And just got a couple guys I want to recognize, although there's lots I could. And the first one I want to mention is Matt Corral. I did do a sort of State of the Stallions fan vote on X for Player of the Week. I'll be doing that each week, so definitely check after each game. You can vote in the poll. And Corral was voted by fans as the player of the game. He probably wouldn't have been my vote, but he certainly obviously would have been a candidate, and that's why I included him, and I have no qualms with him being voted player of the game because he looked amazing, I thought, especially in the second half. Now, the first half, again, there were some jitters, there was some rust, but, I don't want to make excuses, but, to some extent, that's to be expected, right? The guy hasn't started a game of professional football ever. He hasn't started a football game since 2021 when he was at Ole Miss, and so yeah, there's going to probably be some mistakes. There's going to be some miscommunication with receivers. There's going to be a couple moments where he's too quick to feel the pressure in the pocket and kind of, maybe get nervous and have the play break down where he could maybe have hung in there. But all that being said, we saw what he can do. The pass to Kane was incredible. I thought he settled in after that and was much more confident. He played really well in the second half. There was one particular play where we had the ball after the Gilbert interception down in our own end zone, basically, and he escaped the pressure, rolled out of the pocket, slung one, just a laser kind of on the run to get the first down and keep the drive alive. And that really, I think, was that really sealed the game, basically. And so definitely had some flashes where he reminded me of Alex Magoo in terms of the way he can move, avoid pressure, get out of the pocket, find receivers downfield, keep his eyes downfield. And the more he kind of settles in, gets confident, builds connection with his receivers and rapport with his receivers, he's going to be scary. And RJ Young has him as the number one kind of most likely pick for MVP in his MVP power rankings, and I'm with him because I liked what I saw from Corral. I'm high on Corral, and I hope we get to see him a lot week after week this year. So he's my 1-star player of the game. My 2-star player of the game has got to go to Ricky Person Jr. CJ Marable had a great game, but we know what CJ can do. He's been with us since 2022. He's been such a staple of this team. He had a great game, had over 60 yards on the ground and a touchdown, a couple catches. But, Ricky, I thought, was a huge spark for us. He got us that 2-point conversion with just an amazing play where he got upended, stretches the ball out across the pylon or across the goal line inside the pylon, sort of incredibly acrobatic moment, and had another, huge 25 to 30-yard reception where he caught a swing pass from Corral and just sprinted down the sideline, got us deep into Arlington territory. And so just the spark that he provided, both in terms of his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and his ability to run, was awesome. And, Ricky's a big back. He's hard to bring down, but he's also got speed, so he's really the whole package. I shout out to Cody Main on X, who tweets about UFL fantasy, and he mentioned that last season. If you go back and look at the stats, Ricky Person actually had the highest sort of yards after kind of contact and elusiveness percentage of running backs in the USFL in the small sample size that he had towards the end of the season. And so we saw flashes of how good he could be last year, but it was only a couple games really. And he came out the gate hot this year, and I think is going to be a massive difference maker for us this season. And so loved what I saw from him. Really excited to see him, especially with Marable in that backfield as sort of a two-headed monster. And especially, I think, people were worried after Bo Scarborough retired, but we're in good hands because Ricky Person Jr. is that guy. And so he's my 2-star player of the game. And then my 3-star player of the game, really kind of the guy I thought had the peak performance of the day, is a guy that I've been sort of pounding the drum for all offseason, and that's Mark Gilbert. Mark Gilbert was, I thought, easily the best defensive back in the USFL last year. He had 15 PBUs when, I think the next closest defensive back had 8 or 7, so nearly double that. He had 4 interceptions, which led the USFL. I thought he was the best defensive player, or at least secondary player, probably in spring football last year, and really wanted the Stallions to go after him and get him this offseason, which we did, which I was ecstatic about, and I knew he was going to be a difference maker, and that was so true in game 1. He had the fumble recovery early in the game to keep Arlington off the board early. He had the interception late in the game to sort of seal it, so 2 huge takeaways, a couple tackles on top of that, and just, is going to be so key for us this season, and I think couldn't say enough good things about him and his performance. He was our highest graded player by PFF, and just looked every bit of what I expected from him. He was that and then some. And so Got to shout him out and show him some love. He was amazing. He's my 3-star player of the game. Can't wait to see what he does the rest of this year. So now that we've broken down Week 1, let's turn to Week 2 and talk about the upcoming game against the Michigan Panthers this weekend. That game will take place on Sunday. It's actually the Stallions' only Sunday game of the season, but that game will take place on Sunday at 11 Central Time. It'll be televised on ESPN. It is taking place in Michigan, so if you can't be there in person, definitely tune in on TV or come to the official watch party at Back 40 in Birmingham. We'll talk more about that at the end of the show in the Roundup, but would love to see you there for that. But Sunday, ESPN, 11 o'clock. Stallions and the Panthers are both 1-0. The Michigan pulled out a huge win in Week 1 against St. Louis in a game that nobody, well, maybe not nobody, but a lot of people did not predict them, including myself, predict them to win. And so really impressed with what they were able to pull off in Week 1. And, it wasn't a pretty game per se. It was a very Midwestern Big Ten game, which was fitting for St. Louis and Michigan. In the first half, both of those teams could not get anything going. There was, I think, it was like 7 punts or something like that in the first half, a couple turnovers, and went into half with the score being 3-0 in favor of St. Louis. So kind of a rough start for the offenses, but that tells you a lot about how good Michigan's defense is. They forced, I think, 4 3-and-outs in the first half against St. Louis, and St. Louis was, a lot of people were saying, had the best offense in the league coming into this year. So the Michigan defense is scary. And in the second half, they really kind of got going more on offense. They had a couple touchdowns, and E.J. Perry kind of really settled in. He's a guy that can, he was with the team last year, and we saw what he could do, especially in the playoffs last year against the Maulers in a game that they lost, but he had an incredible performance in. He had a couple turnovers in this game, wasn't maybe always super careful with the ball, but we saw what he could do, especially in terms of both not only his arm, but his legs. And the Panthers have a great running back and rushing attack in Wes Hills. Wes Hills is no stranger to the Stallions. He played for the Breakers last year. The first time we played them, he ran all over us. It was bad. Luckily, we contained him the next 2 games, especially that final game in the playoffs. But he's back. He's with the Panthers. And so they've got a good offensive line and a good rushing attack and some weapons. And so this Michigan team is definitely a force to be reckoned with. And the Stallions have their work cut out for them if they want to kind of cement themselves as the 2-0 top team in the USFL conference. So that being said, I want to give a couple sort of keys to the game and then talk about a little prediction for us. My 3 keys for the game, number 1 is win in the trenches. This one is going to be easier said than done. But as I said, the Panthers have a good offensive line and they have a great defensive front 7. Their defensive line was terrorizing A.J. McCarron this past game, and again, like I said, they were able to, on offense, block that St. Louis front and rush the ball and do some things that they wanted to do. And so both of these teams have really good offensive lines and really good front 7s, and it's going to be a huge battle in the trenches, and we have to win it. We have to be able to run the ball. We have to be able to protect Corral. We have to be able to stop their run on defense and get to Perry. And so I think that's the first key for the Stallions in this game. The second key, I would say, which is in some ways related to the first, is we need to force Perry to beat us with his arm. Perry, had 2 interceptions last week against St. Louis, and he's a guy that, at least when I've seen him play, in the, again, sort of limited sample size, he's a guy that, he can sometimes try to force things. He's prone to sometimes make mistakes with his arm. So he can do a lot with his legs. He had 6 carries, but 2 of them were touchdowns. And so, especially if you let him get down in the red zone, if you let him get out of the pocket, he can do some things with his legs. And so what I think the Stallions really need to do is force him to stay in the pocket, get pressure on him, stop the run with Wes Hills, and force him to try and beat you with his arm, which I don't think he can do, especially with the cornerbacks that we have. And again, assuming we get some things cleaned up from the first week, the secondary that we have. And so I think that's going to be a huge thing for the defense heading into this game. And then the final thing I would say is don't let him hang around. We saw what happened with St. Louis. St. Louis and them had a back-and-forth affair in the second half. Both offenses started to kind of get going. But, St. Louis wasn't really able to put it away. They went up 16-15 late, but they gave just enough time for Michigan to get a good kickoff return and then a couple first downs. And Jake Bates, their kicker, hit a 64-yard field goal to win the game, which went viral and everybody's heard about it. So I won't harp on that, but that just goes to show you don't want to let them stay in a tight ball game because they've got a good defense. They can move the ball when they need to, and they've got a kicker who can make it from 70 or more. So if it comes down to a field goal game or a couple points, and they have the ball late, that doesn't bode well for us. So I think the Stallions need to try get out ahead early, not play like we did last week where we shot ourselves in the foot early on in the game, struggled in the first half, but get the ball going early, get out to a lead, and then sort of 0 to 100, all gas, no brakes, kind of keep going, build that lead, and don't let them hang around. Because again, if you let them hang around, that could not bode well when it's all said and done. They're going to be coming in high off of their win first week. Probably have a little bit better crowd, I would assume, playing at home after that win and the good kind of publicity and press they've gotten. And so I think it's pivotal that the Stallions really try to get out there, jump ahead, and create some separation and force the Panthers to play from behind, which I don't think they want to do, and I'm not sure that they can do with the Stallions team. And so that would be my 3 keys for the game. As far as a prediction, I'm going to go with the Stallions in this one. I think I said it on a different show, but I think I really like the Stallions defense and the Panthers defense. I really like the Stallions offense. I don't know that I can say the same about the Panthers offense. Not because they don't have some weapons. I really like their running game especially, but again, I think their passing game is still a little bit behind the Stallions and some other teams in these leagues. Again, I think if the Panthers get in a position where they're forced to have to throw the ball a lot, it's not going to go well for them. And so I just think the Stallions have a little bit more firepower, and I think they're going to be able to pull it out. I don't necessarily expect it to be hugely high scoring, but maybe something similar to this past weekend. I was pretty close with my Arlington prediction. I went with Arlington losing to the Stallions, and my score prediction was 27-17. It ended up being 27-14, so I was actually very close. This week, I'm going to go again with something kind of similar. I'm going to go Stallions win 25-18. I think it's a little bit closer than this past week, but I think the Stallions still win by about a touchdown. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the offensive firepower that the Stallions have, and hopefully they can channel that this week. And with that being said, that is our preview for next week's game. And now it is time to turn to the Roundup, where we cover all the latest news, specifically with the Stallions, but across the UFL. All right, so we've got a lot to go over. Didn't get the chance to do a roundup in last week's podcast, so going to try and cover some things that I would have liked to have covered last week, but didn't get the chance to, as well as all the things that have been going on over this past week and heading into next week. So with that being said, let's jump in. The first thing that I want to mention is that the Stallions did announce theme nights for 2024. So if you haven't seen those yet, I will put them on the screen. For the first home game on next weekend, April 13th, against Memphis, it will be Champions Night, so they'll be recognizing the 2023 USFL champion team. For each of these, I'm not exactly sure what all they're going to entail. They haven't announced all the details yet, but I'm sure they'll have some great things that they roll out. For the second home game on April 20th, it's going to be Throwback Night, so I'm sure that's going to be some kind of ode to the original USFL Birmingham Stallions back in the 80s, so that should be awesome. On the next home game against the Battlehawks, which I imagine is going to be a really great game, the return of A.J. McCarron to Alabama and a little bit of, back and forth in the offseason. So you'll definitely want to be there for that one on May 11th. It's going to be Braves Day. So I know Blooper, the Braves mascot, is going to be there. They're going to have the Braves kind of marketing department's going to be there. They're going to be doing a lot of different giveaways and things like that. So especially if you're a baseball fan, you don't want to miss that. May 18th is going to be Hats Off to Heroes Day. And then June 1st will be Fan Appreciation Day. And, of course, with each of those, I'm sure at a later date we'll get some more details about what exactly is going to be included, whether there's a giveaway or whatever the case may be. But definitely want to mark those on your calendar and be sure to be there for each home game and each theme. Second thing to mention is that the UFO games are also being broadcast not only on television but also on Sirius XM. Actually, after I left the Stallions Renegades game in Arlington this past weekend, when I was driving back to my where I was staying, I pulled up the Michigan and St. Louis game on SiriusXM to be able to listen to it in the car as I was driving back. So I've already taken advantage of that. Definitely would encourage you to do the same if you have access to SiriusXM. Still waiting on a local broadcast here in Birmingham, but right now, take what we can get. At least you can listen on Sirius. Another thing to mention is that there are going to be watch parties for all Stallions away games at Back 40. There was a watch party this past weekend. It looked like it was really well attended. Read that upwards of maybe even 150 to 200 people showed out for that. So that's really awesome. There's going to be another watch party this weekend for the game against Michigan. I will be there. I will be a little late because I'm coming from a party for a baptism, but definitely would encourage you to pull up if you can to that watch party this weekend if you're not going to be able to make the trip to Michigan, and definitely say hey if you see me there. Another thing to know is that shout out to our guy Buck from United Football Media. He pointed this out earlier this week and deserves a lot of credit for this. He noted that Fox Sports, or kind of the people in charge of the UFL, or at least partially in charge of it, filed a couple new trademarks, which is interesting. So they filed a trademark for the Canton Bulldogs, which, if you're not familiar, was sort of an original NFL team way back in the day. Also filed a trademark for the Ohio Bulldogs, and then filed a trademark for the Nashville Tuners, which, as far as I know, without doing some more research, I don't think has any history behind it. But interesting thing, if you listened a couple weeks ago on an episode, we did talk about expansion and the possibility of expansion in 2025. And so I think, as I mentioned on there, adding a couple teams, maybe 2 teams, I don't think is out of the question heading into 2025, of course, depending on how the season goes. And so it's interesting that in addition to some of the trademarks the league already owned, they added a trademark for these couple other teams, again, specifically an Ohio-based team, it sounds like, with a Bulldogs moniker, and then the Nashville Tuners. Again, who knows what that means, whether anything's going to come of that. Companies file trademarks all the time just to kind of sit on things that they might want to use at a later date, so certainly don't want to speculate into it too much, but worth noting, of course. And then another thing I want to mention, so we all don't forget, is that before the Renegades and Stallions game, the Arlington mayor, Jim Ross, challenged Birmingham mayor Randall Woodfin to a bet where the team who lost, that mayor would have to wear the opposing team's jersey to a city council meeting. And so I just want us to remember that Jim Ross, until we get a picture of him or a video of him in a Birmingham Stallions jersey at an Arlington city council meeting, we need to hold his feet to the fire and make sure that he doesn't forget to hold up his end of the bargain after the Stallions beat Arlington this past weekend. So go shout out Jim Ross on social media or something like that, and tell him that you're looking forward to seeing him in a Birmingham Stallions jersey. As far as other things related to last week's game that I just want to mention that I haven't mentioned yet, there was a viral moment this week that revolved around a hit on Jay Sternberger. So again, shout out to our guys at Southern Charm Sports for posting this. They were at the game with us and recorded this live. But there was a hit at kind of in the middle of the game on Jace, where Jace was kind of wrapped up by, I think, 3 Renegades players and was kind of, fighting for extra yardage, but his momentum had kind of stopped, and they're probably getting ready to blow the whistle. And right about that time, a Renegades defensive back, Stephen Jones Jr., sort of torpedoed himself right at Jace's knees as Jace was standing up. And if you haven't seen the video, I would definitely go to Southern Charm Sports. You can find it. Jace also tweeted it out. It's got over 2 million views at this point. One of the, not maybe the most, but one of the most viewed moments from week 1. And see what you think. I thought the hit was a little uncalled for, maybe a lot uncalled for. And it could have been really bad. I mean, Jace could have easily potentially torn an ACL or something else in his knee with the way the hit was done. So if you missed that, go check it out, see what you think. I haven't heard from the league yet if there's going to be any sort of repercussions, but I know Fox News wrote an article about the hit, and some other websites and sports sites have picked it up. So something that I felt like was worth mentioning, because this league obviously really cares about safety. And I think no matter who the players are, again, in this case, it happened to fall on one of our Stallions players, but no matter who the players are, we want to be careful about making sure the game is played the right way and that guys aren't unnecessarily being put at risk for injury, especially given the fact that they're not getting paid a massive amount of money for these games and they're all trying to get a shot back at the league. It would really be a shame to lose a star because of a stupid hit. So check that out if you haven't seen it. As far as TV ratings, and then in a second we'll talk about attendance for week 1, Overall, I thought the TV ratings actually were really good. So the average was just over 1 million. I think it was 1.048 million, just over 1 million. We had 2 games that were over 1 million viewers on average. On both of those were on Saturday on Fox, one of them being the Stallions game, which had about 1.18 million, and then the most viewed game was the Michigan-St. Louis game, which had over 1.3 million viewers. And then on Sunday on ESPN, which isn't broadcast, obviously ESPN is viewed by a lot of people, but it's not broadcast. It's not Fox, ABC, CBS, NBC. Those networks typically pull in the highest ratings. But those games still did really well overall, I thought. I think one was in the 900,000 range and the other was in the mid-700,000 range, again, for an overall average of over 1 million. When you consider the fact that this opening weekend took place on Easter weekend, as well as during the March Madness tournament, specifically the Elite Eight, and on MLB kind of opening weekend, you throw all that together, and I think overall, I think these ratings were actually really solid. Of course, you always wish it could be a little bit higher, but, I didn't know what to expect, and I definitely had some fears that given all the things they were up against, it could be worse. But actually, I think over 1 million to start, given all those factors, is actually a pretty solid start. Now, of course, remains to be seen, what happens next, right? In past spring leagues, there's usually been a pretty big drop-off from the beginning of the season, especially week 1 into weeks 2, 3, 4 in the middle of the season. I'm interested to see, given all those challenges they were up against in week 1 and given all the great press coverage that the league's got over the course of this week, do they potentially maintain or even improve upon those week 1 ratings? Or do we see a drop kind of like we typically have in the past with these leagues? We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I think overall, league executives have to be pretty happy with the start. As far as attendance, attendance was okay. It could have been better for sure. But again, some of the most attended teams were not playing at home. So St. Louis wasn't home, DC wasn't at home, Birmingham wasn't at home, and Memphis wasn't at home. Those 4 potentially have the chance to be, the top 4 attended teams in the league, if not, maybe 4 of the top 5. And so overall, I mean, again, given the fact that it was Easter and all the factors, it could have certainly been worse maybe, but it definitely could have been better. Arlington did have over 14,000, which was a record for them since going back to 2020. They had a little bit higher attendance in 2020, but in terms of last year, they didn't have any games that had that many people. So that was good to see for sure for that opening game, a little bit of a bump for Arlington. Given the size of DFW, I still think they should be pulling in more than they are, but, at least it's sort of maybe trending in the right direction there. And then, for 2 of the games, they were below 10,000, Michigan as well as Houston. Both of those, are unfortunate. Both of those are big markets. They really, I think, have the potential to pull in a lot more people than that, but they've got some work cut out for them. Michigan had some issues with their ticket sales and didn't get those up very quickly relative to some of the other teams. And down in Houston, they didn't really secure a stadium till pretty last minute. So I'm not surprised that those markets didn't do as well, but I think the league really needs to push to try and sort of compensate for some of those early miscues and see if they can get more people in the stands. I think Michigan, we might see a bump based on the press that they've gotten from their week 1 win, and they've got a big game against the Stallions this week, obviously. So hoping that they have a little bit better turnout this weekend there. And then Houston, I don't know. It's that's going to be a tough one, given all the changes that have happened with the merger, given the new stadium, and everything else. I'm a little nervous about that one, but hopefully they can grow that fan base throughout this season. And then San Antonio had about 13,000, which for an early game on Easter Sunday, I think is not bad. Certainly it could have been better. Last year, San Antonio for their opener had over 20,000, I think 22 or 23,000, something like that. So that's really the number I think the league wants, probably for San Antonio to be into the 20s. But on Easter Sunday, it's a tough sell, especially for an early game. So the fact that they won, that again they're doing really well. They look like potentially one of the best teams in this league. I think hopefully what we'll see is the opposite of last season, where last season San Antonio started with pretty great attendance, and then it really dropped off and became pretty poor by the end of the season. We might see the opposite this year for them. We might have maybe poor attendance to start the season, but by the end they might be pulling in 25,000 or more. I would hope so. Hopefully that'll go up. This next week again will definitely be better. St. Louis will be at home, and they have the potential to have more fans at their one game than the league had the entire first week. The league averaged about 11,000-ish for the first week, so about 45,000 or so for across the 4 games. St. Louis could potentially beat that in one game. And then you also got D.C., which will probably be sold out or close to sold out stadium at Audi Field. And so those 2 games alone are easily going to pass the total attendance for week 1. And then, throw a game in Memphis on top of that, which hopefully will be pretty well attended. And like I said, hopefully Michigan will get a little bit of bump after their week 1 win. And so attendance this week should be much better. It's just, a question of how much better and how much that can be maintained throughout the season. Real quick, I wanted to mention my power rankings heading into week 2. Stallions, of course, remain at number 1. I think they are going to be the team to beat until proven otherwise. I had Memphis at 2 and San Antonio at 3. I went back and forth on this one. A lot of people kind of raked me over the coals for putting Memphis ahead of San Antonio, which is fair. I think Memphis didn't look amazing in that game against Houston. The main reason I put Memphis ahead of San Antonio is because I was a little higher on Memphis than San Antonio coming into the season, and both of these teams were in a position where the game was actually maybe closer than it seemed down the stretch. Houston was in it till the end, and DC was really in it until the end, until that kind of sequence where their right tackle spit on a player, and then they got a penalty, a touchdown pulled off the board, threw an interception. I mean, that swung the momentum of the game. But if that had gone differently, it could have been a tie game in the fourth quarter. So both teams, I think, showed that they are beatable, even though they both did look good. The other thing is that I trust Case Cookus a lot more than Chase Garbers. Garbers looked great in week 1, but he didn't have to do anything crazy, right? He had a very kind of great game plan from offensive coordinator A.J. Smith. He had a lot of quick passes, short passes, get the ball out of his hand into his playmakers, and he did what he was asked to do, and that I'm not going to fault him for that in any way. I don't know if in a tight game, we haven't yet to see if the sort of team has to be put on his back and he has to push the ball down the field. Can he do that? I trust Case Cookus to do that a lot more than him. And so given all those factors, I decided to put Memphis ahead of San Antonio in that 2 spot. But we'll find out this weekend. I could be proven totally wrong, or maybe Memphis will pull out the win. But, that's my guess as far as who's the better team there. And I'll get to predictions in a second. 4, I've got Michigan, of course, who pulled out the win, but in a very, very close game against St. Louis, that last-second field goal. So I had St. Louis at 5 because, even though Michigan won that game, those two I felt like were neck and neck, and, not a lot of distance there. And then from there, I got D.C., Arlington, and Houston. Houston, to me, showed some flashes, and they've got a really good defense, but definitely the most concerning of the group. And then as far as predictions for this next week, kind of riding a little bit with my power rankings there, you can kind of guess where I'm maybe going to go. But, as far as the Stallions game, I already talked about it. I think the Stallions are going to be able to pull it out. I'll go ahead and give you predictions for some of the other games, though. I am going to go with Memphis over San Antonio. I know I may be a little bit in the minority here, but I think Memphis home game, again, Case Cookus, they get a chance to correct some things from week 1, and I think they pull it out. I think they're able to kind of contain San Antonio enough to get the win, and I don't think it's going to be shootout per se, but I think we might see a little bit more scoring in this one than some of the other ones. I'm going to go with Memphis wins 27-25, so close game. As far as the other two, I think, for St. Louis, Arlington, I like St. Louis in this one. St. Louis is playing at home in that huge crowd. I wasn't horribly impressed with Arlington in week 1. I wasn't horribly impressed with St. Louis either, but they did show some flashes towards the end. AJ started to kind of get in a little bit too more of a rhythm, and so I think they're just going to be a little bit too much for Arlington. I think they're going to pull it out. We'll say, 22-14. And then as far as the last game there, DC and Houston, I'm going to take DC in this one. I think it's going to be, again, lower scoring because both these teams have, DC, has, I think, a challenge going up against that Houston defense. And then, DC, I think, has an okay defense, but Houston doesn't have a great offense. So I don't think it's going to be high scoring either way. I'm going to go with DC, gets the win, 18-9 over Houston. And we'll see, after the weekend, how close I was on those predictions and those scores. But that's what I'm going with. As far as the Stallions game, after the game, I will be making an appearance on CBS 42. So I'm going to be doing an interview with them that evening after the game on Sunday. That'll be aired, I believe, that night. So definitely tune into CBS 42 if you want to check that out. Hear me to break down the game sort of right after it happens, and support the Stallions in that way. Would love that. And then last thing before I go, got to give a shout out to my guy Stevie T. Last year, Stevie T started some podcast rankings and was privileged to be involved with a couple shows that were, ranked pretty well that he did. And he released his first power rankings of 2024, and everyone was looking forward to this. As far as I know, it's the only UFL sort of podcast power rankings out there. So as far as I'm concerned, it's the official ranking that exists. And I was very privileged to be ranked by Stevie T in the 4 spot out of all UFL podcasts. So top 5 is really an accomplishment, I think, for me, given I just started this a few weeks back, and really appreciate the love from Stevie T. I was actually the only team-specific show ranked that highly. I actually don't think he had any other sort of team-specific shows on the list, and so to be the number 1 team show, again, a top 5 podcast. Stevie is a Stallions guy, so that certainly probably helps my case. But I appreciate him and the love and support from him, and definitely wanted to give him a shout out. So that does it for this week's episode of State of the Stallions. As you can see, I'm not in my usual studio. I'm actually on the road traveling this week, so you have to forgive me for that. Sorry for some of the timing issues getting this out, and for just the maybe not the same quality you're used to. I apologize for that, and certainly look forward to improving in the weeks ahead. This is my first episode for in the season, so if you have suggestions about things you like, things you didn't like, things you thought I should have included, things I forgot to mention, definitely let me know. Leave a comment, shoot me a DM, but let me know of what kind of coverage you want to see of the team throughout the season as we head into week 2 here of a 10-week regular season. It's gonna happen fast. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope it was helpful. Can't wait for week 2 of the UFL. Hope to see you at Back 40 this upcoming Sunday. And don't forget, giddy up.